Of all the theme-related decks I used to make back in the base to fossil era, one I always wanted to do was like a Halloween-based one, but I could never get that to work. There are a few different types of decks one can make: a strong tournament-style deck, a competitive-style type of deck, and then of course for fun decks. I made a lot of for fun decks, but then there were some for fun decks that weren't even feasible as for fun. They just weren't very good. So this Halloween-themed deck using base set to fossil, this is more of just like a for fun kind of deck. Like, it's something very difficult to work with what you have. I know Pokemon like Gyarados and Pinsir were considered scary, but I mean like actual like scary as in things you would see during Halloween or things that people relate to Halloween being scary. Now the limited amount of Pokemon I mentioned that are in Gen 1 that fit into Halloween theme is going to be Rattata, which is interesting because it says Rattata, not Rattata, it's just a show pronounced that. Well, Rattata and Raticate, Cubone and Marowak, Meowth and Persian, Zubat and Golbat, Ekans and Arbok, Grimer and Muck, and then of course there's the Gen 1 Ghost Pokemon. You have Ghastly, two versions of Ghastly, the Fossil and base set version of Ghastly, the Fossil and base set version of Hunter, and they just gave us one version of Gengar. Now personally, I never understood why rats, cats, bats, and snakes were scary, but I don't know. Those are just like stereotypical Halloween things. Never mind the ghost. I mean, obviously the ghosts are stereotypical Halloween stuff. I never understood why Cubone was considered a scary Pokemon. I think maybe because it was during the red and blue era. You can find it in Lavender Town in the Pokemon Tower, and that had a whole entire thing to do with the story. Like, you had to get the Siphon Scope to see the ghost Pokemon, and it was related to Cubone, so that's perhaps why. As for Grimer and Muck, I have no idea about that. I looked up a list of horror-related scary Pokemon, and Grimer and Muck popped in there. I'm not exactly 100% sure why they're on there. Probably the same reason why Gyarados and Pinsir were on there, but I don't have them out here. Ultimately, the goal of a Halloween-themed deck, from base to fossil, would have to be based around these Pokemon, and that's really tricky to do, and that's why I said even as a for fun deck, this wasn't feasible, because you might not have a lot of fun, because they don't sync together at all. Like, there's nothing about these Pokemon that really stands out to work together very much. The main focus is going to be Gengar, of course. Gengar is going to be the main focus of this Halloween-themed Steam deck. So everything's going to have to revolve around Gengar, or Gengar's going to have to work with conjunction with one of these Pokemon. But again, because none of these sync up together in any kind of way, it's really hard to form a deck that's feasible for fun-wise. Right off the bat, I can tell you that Muck and Grimer will not work. Simply for the reason that Muck's Pokemon Power, which is Toxic Gas, shuts off all other Pokemon's power. So we want to use Gengar's Pokemon Power, which I'm going to touch up in a second. So Muck and Grimer, they're out of this. And after spending several minutes staring at this lineup here, trying to figure out which Pokemon should stay and go, sadly, Arbok and Ekans, I dropped that out. Marowak and Cubone, although directly related to Ghastly, Hunter, and Gengar because of the relation Pokemon Tower in Lavender Town, it wouldn't work as well, because the big thing is just your attacks. If any of these Pokemon had an attack that would hit several of your opponent's bench Pokemon at the same time, like Dugtrio's Earthquake or Raichu's attacks, that would be useful, but because they don't, pretty much what I narrowed it down to is going to be just Rattata, Zubat, and Golbat, not even Raticate. And there's a specific reason why, which again I'll address in a second. Gengar and Hunter both have, at least the fossil versions, both have a Pokemon Power. And Gengar's Pokemon Power curse reads as such: once during your turn before you attack, you may move one damage counter from one of your opponent's Pokemon to another, even if it would knock out that Pokemon. This power can't be used if blah blah blah, sleep, paralysis, all that stuff. Which is why I mentioned that a Pokemon that can do damage to multiple Pokemon, like again Dugtrio's Earthquake, that will be really good, but unfortunately none of the Pokemon that are horror related have abilities that affect multiple Pokemon at once. But that's why Muck was dropped out immediately, because they would just stop that effect, which is not what you want. So that's why it's going to focus heavily on Gengar and that Pokemon ability. The Fossil Hunter does have a Pokemon ability called Transparency, which reads: whenever an attack does anything to Hunter, flip a coin. If heads, prevent all effect of that attack, including damage done to Hunter. Same thing, Pokemon Power doesn't work if paralyzed asleep. The big thing is that we're going to skip Hunter. We're going to go directly from Ghastly to Gengar. So when it comes to between these two Hunters, which one matters, doesn't matter. Just going with the Fossil Hunter, just for extra defense in case it comes down to that. But ultimately, we're going to be skipping Hunter and just going straight from Ghastly to Gengar. As for Ghastly, between the two versions, we're going to go with the Fossil version over the base set version. Two reasons. One reason, HP-wise, 50 HP versus 30 HP. Second reason why is because its attack, energy conversion, costs 2 psychic energy cards, put up to 2 energy cards from your discard pile into your hand. Ghastly takes stun damage to itself. A little bit of a setback, but getting energy cards back after discarding them is always useful. Now, as for why these three Pokemon, Rattata, I'll just say Rattata like he says in the show. But why these three Pokemon? Very simple reason. Rattata, 1 energy card, 20 damage, 30 HP. 30 HP is very good. It's resistant to psychic attacks, which is interesting, but weak against fighting attacks. Zubat, same thing, resistant to fighting attacks, but weak against psychic attacks. 40 HP. It has colorless attack. Well, not really. It has a colorless ability that requires 2 colorless energy cards, and Golbat. 60 HP, 3 colorless cards for a wing attack of 30. Same thing, weakness to psychic, resistance to fighting. The reason why is that, interestingly, I didn't notice this until just now. By just now, I mean like a while ago. They don't have a retreat cost. So these Pokemon can retreat for free. That means that if your opponent is able to use a Gust of Wind to bring these up front, you can actually retreat them back. Or you can have them up front and retreat them back and have Gengar go on the attack if you like. Because Gengar does have an ability called Dark Mind, which requires 3 Psychic Energy cards. Which says, if your opponent has any bench Pokemon, choose one of them, and this attack does 10 damage to that Pokemon. Don't apply weakness or resistance. So this actually is able to start spreading damage across your opponent's bench Pokemon, as well as do 30 damage to your opponent's active Pokemon. Thank you, Benny, for the 25th anniversary playmat, as well as these Professor Juniper sleeves. I didn't have any kind of like scary Pokemon sleeves. Like if I had Darkrai sleeves, that'd be great, but since I didn't, I decided to go with something a little more colorful, so I went with Professor Juniper. So working with these restrictions I laid out, horror-related Pokemon from base set 1 to Fossil, this is what I have for just this layout. It's not the layout because I don't think there is one for this kind of deck. But going with Pokemon first, we're looking at 4 Fossil Ghastlys, 1 Fossil Hunter, and 3 Fossil Gengars. Going with 3 Rattatas, with no Raticate sadly, 3 Zubats, and 2 Golbats. I did consider putting a 4th Gengar, and I did consider putting a 4th Rattata, or also Raticate, or maybe another Golbat and the 4th Zubat, but I don't want to put too many Stage 1 evolution cards in this deck, and I want to keep the base count, or at least I want to keep the basic Pokemon count as low as I can without putting too many in there. For trainers, starting with what consistently shows up very often, we have 2 Professor Oaks, 2 Energy Retrievals, 3 Bills, 4 Energy Removals this time, 2 Gust of Winds, and 2 Switches. And then we're continuing with 2 Computer Searches, 2 Lasses, 3 Pokemon Traders, very important, and even more important, 3 Pokemon Breeders, and for this specific deck, 3 Energy Searches. And then for energy cards, nothing special, 2 colors energy cards, 9 Psychic Energy cards, and 5 Grass Energy cards. I'm aware these are not the base set energy cards, so I figured since they're energy cards, it doesn't really matter. I'll just use the modern ones I have, just because I have a lot of them. So since the strategy in this deck revolves around Gengar, what you're going to want to do is get Rattata and Zubat up front if possible, and have them both start dealing some kind of damage. I know Zubat's going to be a little stretched because it's into Grass Energy cards to do damage, and this deck has more Psychic Energy cards than Grass Energy cards. But that is why Energy Search comes useful for that. So you can use the Energy Searches to grab the energy cards you need, especially for something like Gengar, because Gengar only uses Psychic Energy cards. It doesn't use any colorless energy cards. And as useful as Ghastly is, you want to try to keep that on the bench or in your back row as much as you possible, because you're going to need these to turn into Gengar as soon as possible. So you're going to be using Pokemon Trader, Computer Search, and Pokemon Breeder to get these Ghastlies into Gengars as fast as possible. And with Zubat up front, you could of course use Pokemon Trader to find a Golbat and get that into Golbat, and then just use Colorless Energy cards to power that up faster so you can do its attack. It does need 3 Colorless Energy cards. So 1 Colorless Energy card, double Colorless Energy card, sorry, and 1 Grass Energy card will help power that up fast in 2 turns. So you can start dealing some damage, so that's 30 damage to your opponent's Pokemon. Of course, despite saying keeping Gengar in the back row, you still want to try to power that up as much as you can. Try to get some Psychic Energy cards on Gengar, 3 of them so it can do its attack. And since Golbat has no retreat cost, you can just easily bring that back, send Gengar up there once you have it ready. By ready, I mean having multiples, not just one. One is good, I mean, it's good to have one, but you want to have as many of the Gengars out as possible. And then Gust to win your opponent's Pokemon, try to get one up front that does not have energy cards attached to it. And even if you do bring one up with energy cards, you do have energy removal you can use on those. Use Gengar's Dark Mind, do 30 damage to its active Pokemon and 10 damage to a bench Pokemon, and then your following turn, if you didn't knock out that Pokemon's active and you energy removal them so you don't have any way to attack, your following turn, you're going to be able to move that 10 damage onto their active Pokemon. And again, do another 30 attack, you might knock them out, might not knock them out, do another 10 damage onto one of their bench Pokemon and keep going. Ultimately, the big thing out of all this is that, let's say, during the course of battle, you and your opponent are going back and forth, switching Pokemon, Gust to winning Pokemon, you're just switching up what's up front, and you have a spread damage on your opponent's Pokemon, such as one has 10 damage, one has 20 damage, one has 30 damage. If you have all 3 Gengars out, like let's say, just for this Golbat for example, if you have all 3 Gengars out, and your opponent has damage counters across their Pokemon, you can move 10 from each of these. So these can each move 10 onto their active Pokemon. So if they had 10, 20, 30, you move 10 here, 10 here, 10 here. This Golbat's already down to 30 HP. And then Dark Mind for 30 damage more knocks it out. And then your opponent, also their bench Pokemon, takes 10 damage. So think of it that way. Think of it like a ticking time bomb, where every damage your opponent takes, as soon as Gengar starts showing up, you're going to be able to move those damage counters around. And when you have all 3 Gengars out, that's 30 damage you're moving around. And that's it. That's as straightforward as it is. You want to do some damage as you're getting Gengar out, and once Gengar gets out, all the damage you've done, whether it's on one Pokemon or other Pokemon, you can start moving them around and start knocking out your opponent's Pokemon just by moving around. Like if they had a Rattata on their bench, you can just, and you already had like 10 damage on 3 different Pokemon, you can move all 3 onto that Rattata and knock it out. And you can still attack too, which is also the best part about it, is that it doesn't count as an attack or anything. So you're just literally damage manipulating your opponent's Pokemon into knocking them out. It would be great if one of the Pokemon I pointed out earlier that's Halloween related had an attack that damaged multiple opponents' Pokemon at once. Of the many theme related decks, this Halloween theme, just going with Gen 1 base to Fossil, very, very tricky to make feasible. And by feasible, I don't mean like tournament winning feasible, I mean just for fun feasible. I am skipping ahead though because I wanted to cover all of base, then jungle, then fossil. I want to come back to Gengar with a deck that focuses more on its Pokemon power and gives it that edge that these Pokemon unfortunately do not give.